It's a special pleasure and privilege for me to welcome the publication by Liberty's Press of this splendid paperback edition of Ben Kiely's Selected Stories. I knew Ben only briefly towards the end of his long and distinguished life, but I knew of Ben Kiely since I was a young lad at college studying and writing about Irish literature, or Anglo-Irish literature as it was known as then. It's hard to credit now, but in the late 1960s and early 1970s, there was still an intellectual and cultural uncertainty abroad about what Irish literature actually meant, outside the great individual names of the internationally recognised founding fathers of Yeats and Joyce and their immediate peers and younger contemporaries. Ben Kiely's groundbreaking studies of Irish fiction, including hugely neglected writers such as William Carleton, along with his brave portraits of Irish cultural and political life, opened the door not just on the 19th century, of which he knew an immense amount, but also on the inner workings of English, both as language and as literature, and its role in forming Irish self-consciousness. So when I said out loud Kiely as, quote, a man of letters, it sounds somewhat wrong to my ears today, but probably not if I'd have said it in the 1960s. There was and is something patronising about the phrase today, alas. Yet Ben Kiely was an intellectual, but I'm with Colin McCann when he stresses the significance of Ben Kiely as an artist and as a writer of the front rank. Someone who roved between the marvellously available soliloquies of Sunday miscellany type ruminations to the artful teller of emotionally enigmatic stories. The voices of his narrators are as conducive and infectious as Dickens's, and the erudition and folk knowledge that shoots like an electrical current through the richly layered textures of the prose he wrote is as unmistakable as plain chant. Confession time, I never really believed in terms like postmodernism when it's applied to the making of literature. And half the reason why is that critical terms such as this all too often cut the legs from under the achievement of a writer like Ben Kiely. He seemed unfashionable, a figure belonging to an Ireland and an Irish past best pushed to the side. But if the narrative structure known as metafiction is a hallmark of some contemporary fashion, look no further than Ben Kiely. If diaspora studies are predicated upon a mobile and migrant population displaced or in awareness of such historical dispossession, Kiely's fiction obliges but doesn't indulge. If postmodernism visits upon the reader a playful dislodging of authorial presence as reality and the imagined switch roles, well then, just follow Pike Hunter in Kiely's superb A Ball of Malt and Madame Butterfly. And there he was now, hands behind back, noble head high, pacing slowly, beginning the course of Grafton Street. Pike Hunter walked behind him, suiting his pace to the poet's, it's Yeats, to the easy, deliberate rhythms of the early love poetry. I would that we were, my beloved, white birds on the foam of the sea. There is a queen in China, or maybe it's in Spain. They walked between the opulent windows of elegant, glittering shops, doors closed for Sunday. The sunshine had drawn the people from the streets, to the park, to the lush green country, to the seaside. Of the few people they did meet, not all of them seemed to know who the poet was. But those who did know, saluted quietly with a modest and unaffected reverence. And one young man with a pretty girl in his arms stepped off the pavement, looked after the poet, and clearly whispered to the maiden who it was that had just passed by the way. Stepping behind him at a respectful distance, Pike felt like an acolyte behind a celebrant, and regretted that there was no cope or cloak of cloth of gold of which he could humbly carry the train. So they sailed north towards the Liffey, leaving Trinity College with Burke standing haughty-headed and Goldsmith sipping at his honeypot of a book to the right, and the Bank and Grattan orating to the left, and Tom Moore of the Melodies, brown, stooped and shabby to the right, and came into Westmoreland Street, where the wonder happened. For there, approaching them, came the woman Homer's son, old and grey and perhaps full of sleep, a face much and deeply lined and haggard, eyes sunken, yet still the face of the queen she had been when she and the poet were young, and they had stood on the cliffs of Howth Head, high above the promontory that bears the Bailey Lighthouse as a warning torch, and looks like the end of the world. And they had watched the soaring of the gulls, and he wished that he and she were only white birds, my beloved, buoyed out on the foam of the sea. She was very tall, she was not white, but all black and widow's weeds for the man she had married when she wouldn't marry the poet. Her black hat had a wide brim, and from the brim an old-fashioned veil hung down before her face. The pilgrims sold in you, and loved the sorrows of your changing face. Pike stood still, fearing that in a dream he had intruded on some holy place. The poet and the woman moved dreamlike towards each other, then stood still, not speaking, not saluting, at opposite end corners where Fleet Street comes narrowly from the east to join Westmoreland Street. Then, still not speaking, not saluting, they turned into Fleet Street. When Pike tiptoed to the corner and peered around, he saw that they had walked on opposite sides of the street for perhaps 30 paces, then turned at right angles, moved towards each other, stopped to talk in the middle of the street where a shaft of sunlight had defined the tall, overshadowing buildings. Apart from themselves and Pike, that portion of the town seemed to be awesomely empty, and there Pike left them and walked in a daze by the side of the Liffey to a pub called the Dark Cow. Something odd had happened to him. Poetry, a vision of love. No, it's just wonderful, wonderful piece of It's just a wonderful piece of writing. It's so rich. But as I said in my lead into it, I mean, reality and the imagined switch roles. They become this wonderful, dexterous use of English. As we would say today, it's almost sampling literature as well, and there's quotes throughout. Thinking about the relevance of these stories, again, in terms of current fashion, the Heroes in the Dark House story is almost a magic realist story. I might just read you just one little piece of this. I could be here all night. It's just so much, so rich. But just to give you, again, a flavour of Ben Kiely's writing and how it fits so much conducively into current fashion as much as being just itself. The stories had come like genii, living, wreathing from holes in the wall behind smoky hearths, or from the dusty tops of dressers, or from farmhouse lofts where ancient yellow manuscripts were stored, by Bloody Bridge and the Canaan River, called so because of no battle, but because of the number of fine trout killed there. He had heard from Pat Moses Gavigan a completely new version of the story of Finn McCool and the enchanted salmon of wisdom. I could be reading you the start of a Paul Muldoon poem there. Just that Kiely was doing it back then. And needless to say, for those of you who know the work so well, if it's literary gamesmanship and technical know-how, the comic vision, what about the freedom of perhaps one of his best known stories, A Letter to Peachtree? As I said, I could quote all night to make the point I want to stress, which is a very simple point, that Ben Kiely is one of the most alive of contemporary Irish fiction makers, and the world he has made substantial out of the rhythm and pitch of different kinds of spoken and written language and literary reference, is one of the most living and engaging we have produced in this country, to my sense of things. It wears its knowledge with relish and with joy, even when the subjects are loss or failure or unfulfillment, and the damage time brings in its wake. In a way I can't quite express, though Brian Fallon has anticipated my conversation with him, I don't think I've really read Ben Kiely. I listened to his books, not in a tree-hugging kind of way, but in the way one listens to music. It shouldn't pass us by either that the voice and its bright nuances that are contained in selected stories, the learning and the humane intelligence which is masked in Kiely's fiction, was hard-earned at a time when Irish writers endured much greater difficulty and with much less commercial reward than is thankfully the case today. So it is fitting that in this well-produced edition, edited by Ben Faulkner and published by Liberties at a keen, affordable price, we have the opportunity not simply to reconnect with one of Ireland's great writers of the past, but to recognise how fresh and challenging and vibrant that tradition is, which lies behind the impressive achievements of younger writers today. In Bill Doyle's wonderful cover of photograph of the cover of Ben Kiely, he has, as has already been remarked, his hand raised in a kind of benediction, or it may be injunction, to Peter in the Shelbourne bar. It looks as if a conversation has begun or is in mid-flow. You should buy this book several times over and send copies across the globe or down the country to those who love literature or have never read a book of stories in their lives. There's no better place to start. Thank you.